I left the US about 16 years ago, and about 7.5 years ago, I was recognized as an Italian citizen through my ancestry. In this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, I want to talk about some of my perspectives on how it's changed my life and how I'm seeing things now these 7.5 years later. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Welcome to another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. The first most major way that's actually changed my life is being able to call Europe home. Basically, without restrictions, or at least limited restrictions. Or if we're talking about, say, for example, even Switzerland, the ability to go there with fewer restrictions than somebody from outside of the European Economic Area. Almost immediately after getting my Italian citizenship, I decided to move straight to Italy because I thought, hey, if I've got one of these, I may as well know what it's like to actually be a citizen of the country and understand what life is really like there. Learn the language, get to know the people, and get to know the culture. I ended up moving to an area that was maybe the least Italian region in the nation, but I definitely enjoyed my time there. For those of you who haven't seen those episodes, when I was back there, I moved to Alto Adige, or otherwise known as Südtirol, a region of the country that is majority native German speaking. Or maybe I should say native dialect of German speaking. And being the citizen of Italy, an EU nation, this definitely gives me some considerations as to what is going on in this kind of block, this part of the world. And I mean, recently what we've been seeing going on with Germany pretty much pulling out of the Schengen agreement, the agreement that basically opens up the borders so you don't really have to have checks going across. And then even now the Netherlands talking about maybe a mini kind of Schengen area that they'll take part in. It definitely does make me wonder, though, if these are the first steps in further European separation, or if this could be long-term part of the domino effect of the European migrant crisis all the way up to Brexit and maybe this now. I'm definitely not saying I have all the answers or know that this is true, but I just can't help but wonder. And my citizenship to an EU nation definitely has me invested in wanting to know what is going on and what will be happening as time moves forward. Maybe this next point, though, could be a little bit fluffy, but just before we get into the next section, I would like to say thank you to those of you who do help to make this project possible on a monthly basis through patreon.com/Rafael Di Furia, rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, as well as thank you to those of you who participate in this open conversation, and especially this week, for those of you who already have Italian dual citizenship, feel free to share any of your thoughts about the ways that it's changed your life down in the comment section below. And for those of you who are thinking maybe about getting Italian citizenship by descent, feel free to leave any questions and maybe I'll be able to get to those in the future. And again, though, thank you to those of you who do support this project and help to make it possible. And with all of that said, let's get back into the rest of the episode. But for years, I've somewhat jokingly talked about the pizza, pasta, and amore of living in Italy. You could almost extend that a little bit to other parts of Southern Europe, but especially on this last trip that I took back to Italy, because now I do live in Portugal. I am taking full advantage of the citizenship that I have and being able to live in another European nation and to really see what is it like to be an Italian citizen that is living with those same rights as an Italian citizen would in another nation. But going back recently to Italy, it reminded me of how much Italy has felt like home to me. Even though I wasn't born there, and even though I did live there, there has always been a feeling ever since a very young age that it has felt like home in some ways, that there's been this pull. I mean, even I remember years ago hearing about a scientist talking about the makeup of your bones and the minerals or whatever, the kind of base materials that you are formed out of can be traced back to a location that your family has spent like X amount of generations in, that you might see some things that are particular to this area show up in your base structure. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. But if it were true, I would start wondering maybe, is this part of this inexplicable, illogical reason that I've always been drawn towards Italy and always been pulled in that direction? Being able to explore the places where my ancestors came from has definitely been an amazing mind shift. Being able to see these places that are not just that far away place over there on the other side of the world that maybe I didn't necessarily know what they were like or have a connection to, a real connection to, other than knowing that my family came from there, having an emotional connection, but not like a practical knowledge of what that place was. But now, some of these places, I do have that practical experience of what it's like to be there. There are still more places that I have yet to explore. And that's also another fun thing for me, is that with Italian citizenship by descent, you have to go through generations worth of documents and making sure you know who came from where and this and that and how everything lines up. And that's made me even more curious to be able to look into my ancestry, into more parts of my ancestry, because the family line that got me to this point was not my whole family tree. That's how it works for everybody who does go in the direction of Italian citizenship by descent. You only have to prove one direct family line going back to Italy. Another aspect of my life that has changed beyond just the practical ability of being able to stay in a particular place without having to think about visas has to do with the lack of stress when it comes to certain things and maybe a little added stress when it comes to others. Specifically, I'm talking about healthcare. In the few times that I've actually needed to go to a doctor, or actually when I was in Italy having to go to a hospital after getting a really bad burn, and being able to have it treated there and then, not having to think about maybe a long-term effect. I mean, I can say based on the care that I received, my hand has healed and it feels normal like it did before. But if I hadn't have had that access to the care, then I don't know what my hand would be feeling. Wait, hold on. Okay, maybe there's a little bit of damage still there. I hadn't realized it. I hadn't really thought about it till now. But at least it's as good as it is, to the point where all these years later, I hadn't noticed that maybe there was a little bit of a difference. But still, this is what I'm saying. I don't have the concern that if, heaven forbid, something happens, that I'm going to have to think about the financial aspect and whether I'll be able to go or not. But even with that said, I do still have to think about the contributions into the social systems of where I'm living and making sure that it is paid. It is not cheap. It gets expensive quickly, but maybe not as expensive as healthcare might be in the US. And even being an Italian citizen, if you are living in Italy, you are then dealing with one of the top medical systems in the world. Granted, all over the country, you will have different levels of service and care, but generally speaking, as a generalization, it is one of the better systems in the world. Another change in my life is that for years I had toyed around with the idea of going back to school. If I were in the US, then this is something that would never be within the realm of reality that I would even remotely consider. For some, it could be the choice between paying rent and going to school, or a mortgage, whatever it might be. Maybe there's going to be one of those that will actually do you better in the long run. Which one? That's going to depend on the person. But like I said, I've been toying with the idea of going back to school for a while. And having looked at schools back in the States, I mean, even I think Boston University a few years ago, for just 1 year was about like $63,000. Even family friends, grandchildren of family friends, like $65,000 for a school year, and then getting a $50,000 scholarship still left things at $15,000 per year. This is not a small amount of money that we're talking about. But in Europe, there are schools that can be completely free or very low cost. There are some schools that exist which could be just hundreds per year, not per semester. Per year, hundreds. But there are still other schools that could be quite expensive and some that are very extremely expensive. But even one of my siblings decided to go back to school, and they're going to be paying for all 4 years of school a total of $20,000. So even if we're calling it $5,000 a year, this is still a lot less expensive than what you have to consider in other parts of the world. So whether I ever decide to go back to school or not, to have that option in front of me feels almost freeing in a way. To have that ability to do this thing is quite interesting, and it's actually exciting in some ways, even if I don't take advantage of that possibility. So I think really kind of the point that I'm getting at is that there is this sense of freedom that I am feeling as a dual citizen living in Europe, minus the payments that have to be made for healthcare. But this next point, though, is a particular point that I haven't taken as much advantage of as maybe I would have liked to. It is the ability to travel around Europe without even thinking about it. Granted, if you arrive over here and you are just traveling around and you have a visa which allows you to go around for 3 months, that's fine. Then you have that window of time for 3 months within 6 months to be able to explore different parts of Europe. But being somebody who is living in this part of the world, I mean, the option of those 15 to 50 euro flights to be able to hop on anywhere and not even have to take a passport with you. Or, I mean, actually, even when I flew back to Italy recently, it came to the point where I was like, do I really need to take my passport with me? I can just fly with my ID. I don't have to take this document with me. I'd rather keep it safe, but maybe, you know what? Just in case, I'll keep it with me. And I didn't have to. Again, there's something very freeing about that, to be able to not have to have certain things in the back of your mind. But even like saying like those 15 to 50 euro flights, I've paid more for trains, international trains and buses than some of those flights. I mean, it's still not the old days when you could get a 4 euro or a 5 euro flight internationally, but they're still pretty reasonably priced. And of course, this is only with like a very small carry-on. I mean, we're talking about cheap here, dirt cheap. If you start adding in all the extra luggage and stuff, then it can equal about the same as like a normal ticket anywhere else, but you do have options in front of you if you're wanting just a quick little getaway, or you have to go somewhere, like you have a meeting. It is possible to go fly to the other side of Europe for a meeting for a very low price, at least if you're flying between two locations that have good connections between them, because not all locations have great connections between them. So again, for me, I think it really does come down to this sense of freedom and liberty to be able to do things. Actually, it's almost funny to be thinking about things in that term, because I know there are a lot of people who move to the US thinking about some of that ability to kind of live a very different lifestyle. And it would be different from what you could find here in Europe in many aspects. And maybe what some people look for in the US is something that I've personally found for myself in Europe, to be able to live where I think is appropriate for me, and then also being able to have the freedom to get to explore places and cultures that I might not have otherwise. Even though I do have this sense of adventure and wanting to explore these different cultures, I don't necessarily always feel the need to go and travel to these different places. If I had still stayed in the US, I don't know if I would be exploring as much as I do. And even then, like I said, I have not done as much as I really would have liked to. But these, what I'm talking about mostly in this episode, have been the major advantages if you were to decide to actually make Italy your home, or another country in the European Union, or Switzerland potentially. If you are an Italian citizen living outside of the European Union, you might not have as many of these benefits that come to be in front of you. Granted, there are certain things actually about being a European citizen outside of the continent that could actually be a benefit. Like, for example, if you are living in a place and it has turned into a really horrible place where it's truly dangerous and they're actually having to evacuate people out of there, like we saw during 2020, there were people who were citizens of different European nations and they were unable to get to the consulate for their country. But as the citizen of an EU nation, they were able to go to another country's consulate or embassy and get evacuated by one of those other countries to get back to Europe, to get back home. So when we're talking about safeties, protections, and considerations for people who are citizens of members of the European community that we could call at your disposal and be able to exercise your rights inside of Europe, some of those can come into play outside of the continent as well. One of the biggest changes in my life has been that I've been able to make content online, which has helped literally thousands of people that I can say very definitively that I know that I've been a part of, to be able to help them to realize their dreams of going back to Italy like I had as well. I've had people who've reached out to me personally to tell me about the content that I've created. I mean, that for me has just been a really amazing feeling to have been able to be in the position to do that. I mean, it's not only on this channel, because this channel, I used to focus a lot more on the topic, but I also now collaborate with an Italian lawyer. Many of you may be familiar with the project. It's called the Italian Citizenship Podcast. We also do another one called the Italian Real Estate Podcast. And we actually just launched another project called Ask the Italian Lawyer. And for me personally, this has been another aspect of having dual citizenship, having the Italian citizenship, that I've been able to share this information with other people who are in the position that I was in and who have this passion for Italy and who have not just the desire to call it home, but also the desire to make it their home. So it's not only my exploration of what I've been able to go through in my family and being able to go through my experiences, but having also been a part of many other people's journeys to achieve that dream has been really special for me. And I can say I'm very grateful for that. But anyway, this has been another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Thank you all so much for subscribing, liking, and sharing these episodes, and sharing your thoughts down in the comment section below. Because of course, if you have anything to add or to share from your own stories, this is an open conversation. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time. Later.